All right, let's jump right in. We're tackling a story that's been making headlines and stirring up a lot of conversation.
Yeah, it's definitely got people talking.
You might have heard Denali, North America's tallest peak, is back in the news,
Back with a vengeance, you could say.
thanks to President Trump, who just renamed it back to Mount McKinley.
Well, it's not just a simple name change.
No, it's definitely not that simple.
You see, it reignites this long-standing debate that goes way deeper than just what we call a mountain.
Right, it digs into history and culture.
Even some political maneuvering, you could say.
We've got a whole stack of research and articles here.
And let me tell you, it gets pretty interesting.
Did you know that this mountain has basically been a political football for over a century?
It's true, and we're going to unpack all of it.
We'll uncover the story behind this back and forth renaming the legacy of President McKinley himself and the significance of Denali for the Athabaskan people.
For sure. And here's a little tidbit to get us started. President McKinley never actually set foot in Alaska.
Yeah, you heard that right. Never even visited the state.
So the question is, how did a mountain thousands of miles away end up with his name?
That's exactly where we're going to start.
To understand what's going on now, we really need to rewind the clock.
Back to the late 19th century.
Yeah, we're going back that far. To understand William McKinley.
How he became the 25th president and how he got tied to this mountain.
McKinley's story, it's a real classic American tale. Born in Ohio in 1843, he wore a lot of hats.
Like what?
Well, he was a Civil War soldier, a lawyer, a congressman, governor, and eventually, of course, president. But here's the thing that might surprise you.
What's that?
One of his main political stances.
Yeah.
It really echoes in today's political climate.
You're talking about
His belief in tariffs.
tariffs.
Uh-huh.
That seems like kind of a throwback.
Well, it might seem that way, but McKinley, he was really convinced that tariffs, those taxes on imported goods, they were crucial to protecting American businesses and workers.
I see. So he wanted to give American-made products an advantage.
Exactly. He was actually the driving force behind the McKinley Tariff of 1890.
Oh, I've heard of that.
This policy raised tariffs significantly on a bunch of different products.
Sounds like a pretty bold move.
Yeah.
So how did that go over?
Not great, actually. It actually sparked a huge backlash.
Really?
Uh-huh. It even cost McKinley his own seat in the House of Representatives.
Wow, that's a political gamble gone wrong.
Big time.
Mm-hmm.
So you might be wondering, how did he come back from that?
I am. How did somebody bounce back from that and become president?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. His campaign manager, Mark Hanna, came up with a really unique strategy.
For the 1896 election?
Yes, the Front Porch Campaign.
The Front Porch Campaign. What's that?
So instead of traveling all over the country campaigning, McKinley just stayed put in Ohio.
He just stayed home.
Pretty much. He invited voters to come to him.
Wait a minute. So no rallies, no big speeches across the country?
Nope. Completely different from how elections are run today, right?
Yeah, totally different. It's hard to imagine that working now...
It was definitely a gamble, but it paid off. People came by trainloads to hear McKinley speak from his front porch.
Wow, so he won the presidency from his front porch.
He did. It's pretty amazing. It makes you think, could that kind of campaign work today?
In our world of social media and 247 news coverage?
I don't know. It really highlights how much things have changed.
Okay, so we've got McKinley in the White House.
Tariffs are making headlines.
And it's right around this time that his name gets linked to that mountain in Alaska.
That's right. But remember, he never actually went there.
Yeah, we talked about that. So how did that happen?
The mountain already had a name, you know.
It did?
Denali. It means the tall one in the language of the Athabaskan people.
The native people of that region.
Exactly. They had revered Denali for centuries, way before any European explorers even arrived.
So Denali has a deep history and cultural significance.
Absolutely. So back to our question. How did McKinley's name get attached to this mountain he never even saw?
That's what I want to know.
Well, picture that McKinley's campaigning for president, right? And there's this gold prospector, William Dickey. He's exploring the Alaskan wilderness.
Okay.
Dickey was a huge McKinley supporter.
I see where this is going.
And he decides to name that towering peak Mount McKinley.
As a tribute to the future president.
Exactly. It's incredible to think about. One prospector's decision had this huge impact.
It really shows how unpredictable history can be.
And how even small actions can have consequences that last for generations.
So this renaming happened way back in 1896.
Right, as McKinley was on his way to the White House.
And it's been controversial ever since.
It's become the symbol of a much bigger issue.
This clash between recognizing indigenous cultures and the legacy of colonialism.
It's a debate that's still going strong today.
Yeah, it's not going away anytime soon.
And it all started with that prospector and his decision to name a mountain after a president who never even set foot in Alaska.
This is already so fascinating.
And we're just getting started.
Buckle up. We're going to dig even deeper after the break. Okay, so we've got this mountain in Alaska named by a prospector after a president who never even visited the state.
Right. But the story doesn't end there.
No, it keeps going. This name, Mount McKinley, stuck around for a long time.
Over a century. Even though the Athabascan people always called it Denali.
They never stopped using their name for it.
Right. Alaska actually officially recognized Denali as the mountain's name back in 1975.
But the federal government didn't go along with that.
No, they kept calling it Mount McKinley until much later.
And then President Obama finally made it official in 2015.
He restored the mountain's indigenous name.
It seemed like that was the end of the story.
Yeah, but then a few years later, President Trump reversed that decision.
So we're right back where we started.
It's amazing how this one mountain keeps popping up in American politics.
It's like a symbol for all these bigger issues.
About history and culture and the power of names.
I guess it makes you wonder what was going on behind those decisions.
Yeah.
I mean, both Obama and Trump had their reasons for changing the name back and forth.
Definitely Obama's move was seen as a gesture of reconciliation.
A way of showing respect for indigenous culture.
And recognizing Alaska's request to officially use the name Denali.
They'd been asking for that for a long time.
And what about Trump's decision to switch it back to Mount McKinley?
Was it just about undoing what Obama had done?
Some people might see it that way, but remember, Trump has always admired McKinley's policies,
Especially his focus on tariffs.
which are kind of similar to some of Trump's own economic ideas.
So by putting McKinley's name back on the mountain, was Trump trying to connect himself to a historical figure he admired?
You could definitely interpret it that way. It's a way of framing a certain narrative about American history and leadership.
And of course, these decisions sparked a lot of debate.
For sure. We've got some strong opinions from both sides.
Like Ohio Congressman Bob Gibbs.
He saw Obama's renaming as disrespectful to McKinley's legacy.
And he praised Trump's reversal.
And then you have Alaskan Senator Lisa Murkowski.
She completely disagreed with Trump's decision.
She emphasized how important it is to honor the mountain's original name and the connection that the Athabascan people have to it.
It just shows how something like renaming a mountain can become so much bigger than just a name.
It taps into these deep cultural and political currents.
It makes us think about how we understand and interpret history. You know, it's interesting how McKinley's story still feels relevant today.
Yeah, especially his views on tariffs. They're back in the headlines again.
It's almost like history is repeating itself.
There are definitely some parallels. McKinley believed that tariffs were essential for protecting American businesses and jobs.
Which is something we hear a lot about today.
Exactly. And McKinley faced a lot of opposition to his tariff policies.
Just like we're seeing now. But if you remember, toward the end of his life, McKinley seemed to change his mind about tariffs.
That's right. In his final speech, he actually advocated for a more open approach to global trade.
He said, "The period of exclusiveness is past."
It's a pretty significant statement. It suggests he was starting to see things differently.
Like, he realized that the U.S. couldn't just stay isolated from the rest of the world.
It makes you wonder what led to that shift in his thinking.
Was he just being practical?
Or was it a deeper change in his worldview?
Historians are still debating that. Some think he realized that high tariffs were hurting American consumers.
Others see it as a sign that he understood the growing importance of the global economy.
Regardless of his reasons, it's interesting to see how even strongly held beliefs can evolve over time.
It shows that leadership is complex and that things aren't always black and white.
So we've got McKinley grappling with these issues that are still relevant today. But what about him as a person? What was he like outside of politics?
Well, he was known for being quite approachable and warm.
Really?
Yeah.
That's kind of surprising, considering he was this tough politician with some pretty controversial policies.
It goes to show that people are complicated and historical figures are no exception.
He was apparently very kind and able to connect with everyday people.
And he genuinely cared about the well-being of the country.
It reminds us that we shouldn't judge historical figures just on their political positions.
We need to consider the whole picture.
So we've covered McKinley's life, his policies, and his unusual connection to this mountain he never even visited.
And now it's time to shift our focus back to Denali itself.
What makes this mountain so special beyond the naming controversy?
Denali is more than just a mountain. It has incredible cultural and ecological importance.
For the Athabascan people, it's sacred, right?
Exactly. For centuries, Denali has been a central part of their spiritual beliefs
They see it as a source of power.
and a symbol of their cultural heritage.
It represents their ancestors and their history.
Their stories and traditions are woven into the very fabric of the mountain.
From a geographical standpoint, Denali is pretty impressive.
It's the highest peak in North America.
Over 20,000 feet above sea level.
Just a massive giant that dominates the landscape.
And it's not just about its size. Denali is also home to a huge variety of plants and animals.
Grizzly bears, caribou, Dall sheep, golden eagles. It's a truly amazing ecosystem.
So it's this incredible place where nature, culture, and history all come together.
And that's why this whole debate about its name is so fascinating.
It forces us to think about the different ways we connect with places.
How we understand history and how we make sense of these competing narratives.
And ultimately it raises a really important question. How do we honor the past while also acknowledging the need for progress and understanding different viewpoints?
That's a question that goes way beyond just Denali. It applies to so many things.
Historical monuments, place names, the stories we tell about our shared history.
It's a challenge we need to face head on. You know, this whole Denali Mount McKinley thing, it brings up a really interesting question. Does renaming a mountain or any landmark really honor a person's legacy?
It's a good question.
Like, should we be prioritizing the history and culture that are already connected to that place?
That's a tough one. It's like we're trying to balance recognizing historical figures with honoring the deep connections people have to a specific place.
It's a dilemma we see everywhere, not just with mountains. Statues, street names, even whole cities. How do we reconcile the past with the present? How do we decide whose stories get told and whose voices get heard?
It feels like it's more than just about right or wrong.
It is. It's about understanding all the different perspectives and layers of meaning.
Recognizing that things aren't so simple.
Exactly. What might have seemed like a good idea in one time period could be seen as totally insensitive or even offensive now.
It's a reminder that our understanding of history, it's always evolving.
Always changing, shaped by new information and different social values.
Like we talked about earlier with the McKinley's views on tariffs, what was once a core part of his economic policy is now seen as much more complex.
That's a great example. It shows how historical figures and their legacies can be reinterpreted over time.
And how we need to keep an open mind about the past.
Always question what we think we know.
So where does that leave us with Denali or Mount McKinley?
It feels like we're stuck between these two names, two histories, two ways of seeing this one place.
Yeah, it does feel that way.
Maybe the best way forward is to just embrace that complexity.
To acknowledge that both names have meaning.
And they both reflect something important about the mountain's story.
It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Right. We can recognize both the indigenous name, Denali,
which reflects the Athabascan people's deep connection to the mountain.
And we can also acknowledge the historical name, Mount McKinley,
which represents a part of American history.
It's about telling a more complete and inclusive story. One that honors all the different cultures and histories that have shaped this place.
It's recognizing that history isn't some fixed thing.
It's constantly evolving.
Being reinterpreted and reevaluated.
And having these conversations, exploring all these different perspectives, that's how we can learn and grow.
This has been quite a journey. We've uncovered so much more than just a name change.
We've explored William McKinley's life and legacy.
A president whose ideas are still relevant today.
And we've delved into the cultural importance of Denali for the Athabascan people.
We've really wrestled with some big questions.
About how we interpret history, how we honor the past, and how we bring together different viewpoints.
I hope our listeners have gained a new appreciation for the power of places like Denali.
For the complexities of history, and for the importance of thoughtful discussion and debate.
We've only scratched the surface here.
But hopefully we've piqued your curiosity.
So the next time you see a picture of that majestic mountain in Alaska, whether you call it Denali or Mount McKinley,
remember the story behind the name.
Remember the people who've been shaped by it.
And the ongoing conversation about history and culture.
And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to learn more about William McKinley.
The president with the red carnation.
Who left behind a surprisingly complex and fascinating legacy.
That's what the Deep Dive is all about.
Thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the ideas and events that shape our world.